Who's actually going to get the most out of an industrial to-pan bottom feed machine, and who would be better off putting their money into a domestic sewing setup? Is the price justified for a small shop that only stitches a few hundred pieces a month, or does it make sense for a hobbyist who wants to tackle occasional leather bags? Those are the questions that keep most people up at night before they click Add to Cart. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When you're standing in front of a Juki DU 1181N for the first time, the biggest hesitation is often the sheer size of it. It sits on a steel frame that feels more like a piece of equipment you'd find in a small factory than a home garage. That can be intimidating if you've only ever used a portable serger or a compact quilting machine. The reality, though, is that the machine's footprint is a direct result of what it's built to do: handle high-speed stitching on heavy fabrics without the feed slipping. If you've ever tried to sew through canvas, denim, or upholstery material on a regular home machine, you know how often the fabric can bunch up or the needle can skip. The DU 1181N's dual feed system eliminates that problem by pulling the material from both the top and the bottom, keeping the layers perfectly aligned even at speeds that would make a regular machine stutter. Let's talk about who actually benefits from that. If you run a small batch clothing line, a leather goods studio, or a home-based upholstery business, the speed and feed consistency translates straight into productivity. A typical production run of, say, 100 canvas tote bags can be cut down from a half day on a domestic machine to under an hour on the DU 1181N, because you can push the needle past 1,200 stitches per minute without losing stitch quality. The industrial clutch motor, which runs on standard 110-volt power, delivers that torque without the motor overheating, a real pain point on lower-end machines when you try to push them hard. On the flip side, if you're a weekend hobbyist who sews a few quilts a year, the machine quickly becomes overkill. The learning curve is steeper because you have to adjust the top and bottom feed tension, and the foot pedal responds differently from the foot controls you're used to. You also need a dedicated space for the power cord and a sturdy table or cabinet to mount it. Those are trade-offs that many casual sewers simply aren't ready to make. In that scenario, the extra speed is more of a novelty than a practical advantage, and the cost well above what a typical consumer would spend on a home model doesn't justify the return. Practical strengths become clearer once you start a real-world project. I've seen a small leather accessory shop use the DU 1181N to stitch 5mm stitching on thick leather straps for a month-long order. The machine held the tension without the thread breaking, and the stitches came out uniformly flat, which is essential for a professional finish. Another example is an upholstery repair service that needed to replace worn fabric on a set of restaurant chairs. The to-pan bottom feed kept the heavy fabric from sliding while they matched the pattern, saving them minutes of manual pinning on each piece. Those scenarios highlight that the machine isn't just fast, it's reliable when the material itself is demanding. Weaknesses, however, are just as concrete. First, the noise level is noticeable. The industrial clutch motor produces a humming that can fill a small workshop, so if you share a space with a quiet office or a home studio with thin walls, you'll need to consider sound dampening. Second, the machine's stitch length range is broad, but the adjustments are mechanical levers that require a bit of force. You can't just turn a dial with a fingertip, you need to use both hands and sometimes a small wrench, which can interrupt the flow if you're making frequent changes. Finally, the machine doesn't come with built-in thread counters or digital readouts. If you rely on those features for precise stitch counts, you'll have to add a separate counter or keep a manual tally. Now, let's get into value. The price tag on the DU 1181N sits in the industrial tier, and that's where its value proposition lives. You're not paying for a pretty finish or a brand name premium, you're paying for an industrial clutch motor that can run for hours without overheating, a dual feed that actually works on thick, multi-layered fabric, and a construction that can survive the occasional drop of a heavy roll of material. Compared to buying a separate top feed attachment for a home machine, often a costly and temperamental add-in, the DU 1181N bundles that capability into one solid platform. For a business that turns out dozens of heavy fabric items a week, that reliability translates into less downtime, fewer ruined pieces, and a clearer bottom line. If you're still on the fence, ask yourself 3 quick questions. Do you regularly sew materials that a regular home machine can't handle without frequent thread breaks or skip stitches?